Welcome to My on Mondays, an explorative approach to the possessive my through narratives, art, and sound. Each Monday brings a new creation and unique perspective. My on Mondays is brought to you by Ming Studios, a contemporary art space and international artist residency program dedicated to the exhibition, experience, and exploration of arts and culture. Along with exhibiting artists from around the world, Ming also serves the community by hosting innovative programs including performances, workshops, screenings, readings, artist talks, and other cultural activities. For more information, or if you'd like to participate in My on Mondays, you can visit our website at mingstudios.org. Hello, and welcome to the 165th episode of My on Mondays. Today, to start out the new year, we have another episode by our three Angsty Poets, Tomas Baiza, Rebecca Evans, and Christian Wynn, who gathered once again, initially chatting about recipes and dive bars, but the chatting turned to ranting, the ranting turned to rage, the rage turned to poetry, because everything is poetic, and since it's the start of another year, one that feels a bit bleak, the poets dove into the dark arena of resolutions and revisions. Tomas Baiza is originally from San Jose, California, and now finds himself in Boise, Idaho. He's the author of the novel Delivery, a Pocho's Accidental Guide to College, Love, and Pizza Delivery, published by Running Wild Press in 2023, and the mixed genre collection A Purpose to Our Savagery from Rise Press. Delivery was selected as the 2024 Treasure Valley Reads featured novel, and Tomas's writing has been nominated for the Pushcart Prize, the Best of the Net, and Best American Short Stories anthologies. Tomas has fenced in Italy, been rescued by helicopter from the Sierra Nevada, fended off wild dogs while hitchhiking in rural Morelos, Mexico, and once delivered a dozen pizzas to a Klingon-themed orgy at a sci-fi convention. When he's not writing, Tomas is running trails or obsessing over bonsai trees. Rebecca Evans writes the difficult, the heartful, the guidebooks for survivors. Her work has appeared in Narratively, The Rumpus, Brevity, and more. She's earned 2 MFAs, one in creative nonfiction, the other in poetry from the University of Nevada, Reno at Lake Tahoe. She's authored a full-length poetry collection, Tangled by Blood, published by Moontide Press in 2023, and her second poetry book, Safe Handling, was just published this year. She shares space in a tiny Idaho town with her sons and 4 Newfoundlands. Christian Wynn is a fiction writer, poet, nonfiction writer, teacher of creative writing, and producer of literary and storytelling events based in Boise, Idaho. He's the author of 2 story collections, Naked Me and What's Wrong with You is What's Wrong with Me, and the forthcoming novels Crocodile and My History with Careless People and Other Stories. His work has appeared in McSweeney's, Plowshares, the Chicago Tribune's Printers Row Journal, Glimmer Train, Joyland, Expat Press, Tri-Quarterly, Gulf Coast, and many other fine magazines and journals. And from 2016 to 2019, he was the Idaho Writer in Residence, the state's highest literary honor.
Welcome to our 10th Angsty show. We're the 3 Angsty Poets, which includes myself, Rebecca Evans, along with Tomas Baiza and Christian Wynn. Today, we're talking about our angst with revisions and resolutions. I think these 2 topics completely intersect and overlap, but I'm super excited to hear everyone else's take. So, Christian, I want to know, what's your angst with revision, if you have angst with that, or resolution? Do you have a best, a worst?
Yeah, no, it's there's plenty of angst on several levels. I'll start with just some of my projects of late have been, as I mentioned to you guys before we got on the air here, just been doing a lot of revision on a couple of different novels, but one at a time. So that's one that I was just working on this morning, and then trying to kind of figure the point of view and like either put things in quotes here or not quotes there, and just like the minutia of it. Once I've already written a draft and then gone over it once, and I'm on the third plus revision, and the angst around that for me for sure is just reading what I had revised before and being still like, oh my God, this needs more revision. It's like, I'm like, what was I thinking last time? But then I would add some stuff in the last draft. I'm like, oh my gosh, I forgot I added this whole section. And I'm like, this has to go now. So, but then I had to try to like maybe keep a little bit of that new edition in there. So it's just a puzzle, and it's really satisfying and it's necessary. And I, sort of primarily thus far I've been working on novels quite a bit the last 2-3 years. Just by long or short stuff went long, but mostly I've been a, short fiction writer and poet, in the publishing world, thus far. And I'll get famous with my novels here soon, so wait for that. So, but yeah, it's a big beast, the novel. This is about a 70,000 word novel I'm working on now. At least it is right now. I'd like to get it maybe down to like 65,000, but it's just so much puzzling that's difficult. And I guess one of my resolutions is to get these novels out in the world. We can talk maybe about resolutions a bit more. My angst around that is something that you had brought up, both of you, I believe, when we kind of broached this idea of like, well, what we should do for like a New Year's, and those resolutions are obviously right out there, low hanging fruit, and it is an arbitrary thing for sometimes. So it's sort of like this. That's what I sort of don't. It's like people who somebody brought this up earlier when I was talking to a friend of mine, and she was like, yeah, it's like people going with like dry January, or people doing, sort of taking particular holidays to do something in their life that they supposedly don't do otherwise, like why? I mean, it is New Year's, so there's a good reason for it to be like, brand new year, let's do some new stuff. But the angst around that is that it's kind of a false front, it's just kind of it's a fugazi, I don't know, it's not good, it's just saying people generally don't follow through. And so I have goals as a writer, certainly, all the time I'm setting new goals. Like I want to set myself dates, or if I have friends like yourselves to maybe pass drafts along to, or if I'm just, there's all kinds of deadlines that come up in the writing world for us, all of us, I'm sure for you guys. But the angst around maybe the writing resolutions are that, we should have those kind of things all the time. It doesn't have to just be at New Year's, but I do have some that I am looking forward to in the new year, as it just kind of lands with these novels I'm working on in a pretty good timing spot. So anyway, my angst is expressed enough right now. We'll get a little angstier as we move forward. But Tomas, what about yourself?
Do I carry angst? Of course I do.
Yes, you do.
But
I've seen.
what in particular are you wanting to hear about?
Oh well,
Your angst with revision and or resolution.
yeah.
Yeah, I'm not a huge fan of resolutions, just because of the reasons that Kristen just went through. If you're gonna do it, do it. If you're not, then don't commit to it. And that can happen at any time. And that feels cliche to say, but I've never really understood resolutions. Ironically, the resolution that changed my life the most and the commitment that I made happened on New Year's Day, many, 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 many years ago. And it just so happened that the worst night of my life was New Year's Eve, New Year's morning.
Hmm.
And I resolved to never, ever, ever relive anything like that again. And so the one resolution I made happened to be on New Year's Day. And so that was just the strangeness of timing, right? But it would have happened at any other moment if at any other night had been that bad. So I'm pretty much a hypocrite saying that I'm not a fan of resolutions, but the one that I did that stuck was on New Year's Day, 1987. So I can't claim that I've never employed one successfully. So I don't believe in them, but I practiced one in particular, and so that makes me a total hypocrite. With regards to revisions, I feel like a fairly peaceful and utilitarian experience or feeling towards revisions. I don't have a problem with self-revising. I have no problem going back in and tearing something apart. The only issue I might have is that it makes things more complicated, like you were saying. It can tangle things up, but I sort of make sure not to fall in love with my first drafts ever. And so I don't really have a problem going back and just editing, which to me are tweaks, or revisions, which are really just dismantling and moving parts. If I do have any angst towards revisions, it's if I think that the person to whom I'm accountable and responsible for revisions, usually a publisher's editor,
Mhm.
has a very different vision for the piece than I do. That's where I start to dig in my heels and maybe get a little bitchy because and I'd like to think that I can tell between a, a suggestion that I think has a lot of merit, like, oh, I never thought about that. Ooh, yeah, I really should put that in. And I'd like to think that I've done that a lot. I'm really open to good ideas, but I once had an editor say, I think I need for you to remove the mother character. And I'm like, are you fucking kidding me?
Hmm.
And it's because he hated the mother character. I
Hmm.
wrote the mother character as somebody very difficult to get along with. That was on purpose. And his response was, I don't like her, so just take her out. I want to enjoy your book more, so just take out this hateful character. And I was like, no,
No.
not gonna happen. So I can dig in my heels, but it's when I think that the revisions or the suggestions really don't fit the vision. If somebody says you could do a whole lot better here, which they have, and I think I need to see this, this, and this, and it just strikes me as super true to what I'm trying to do, then I eat that humble pie and say, yep, I gotta go
Mhm.
there. You're right. You're totally right. I gotta go there. And I've gotten some really good feedback in writing groups from people who just had knee-jerk reactions. So and that
Yeah.
can cause some angst, but it's productive angst. It makes me want to go and fix it and do better.
Yeah,
Is
yeah.
that
I get
something I'll quick follow up on that, and maybe then we can get to maybe you have an answer to this too. But yeah, was that how did you learn, or when was there ever a time, Tomas, like that you struggled with that advice or kind of the editorial sort of revision advice you were getting from either peers? I mean, as a younger writer, I know it bothered me more, and it took me a little while to get over that ego, I guess, of holding on a little too tightly to early drafts. But were you always good with it, or was it sort of a learned process for you?
Oh, I don't know that I came into it with any particular sense of grace.
Hmm.
I think I think by the time I started showing my stuff to people in formal settings, like in classes or in writing groups, I never showed a random friend. I never showed a family member. I don't know how people could do that and expect to get truthful responses back. I really don't. I don't get it. Unless that friend is totally fine with tearing your heart out, I just don't believe that friends and family are the people that you go to with your writing. If it works for others, great. I can't think of a single family member or friend, actual friend, capital F, that I would give my stuff to and expect them to just kick me right in the nuts. I can't, I can't think of that. But I think I was old enough to be able to kind of take some hits, but also I hadn't been writing long enough. I feel like I've been in the room with some late teens, early 20s who are still super precious about their writing, and any kind of feedback just crushes them. And that's hard to watch, but I think maybe it's because they haven't been writing long enough, and they're still figuring out what it means for them. I was sort of in the same boat, but literally 30 years later. And I remember thinking, well, if this doesn't work, I got other shit I can fall back on. I'm not a writer, and so I'm not as emotionally invested until
Hmm.
I started to really like what it felt like for your writing or for my writing to affect people. And that's when it started meaning something to me. And so I think I just came at it differently than a lot of my writing peers. And when I say peers, I'm talking about people in their 20s, right?
Yeah,
Mhm.
absolutely. I can definitely add on to some of that, but I won't right now. Let Rebecca hop in. So,
Yeah, I'll start with and then I'll add on to Tomas's thoughts too, and your thoughts too, Christian. I think like angst with resolutions, I'm on the same planet as both of you. Like I think part of this is worked in the fitness industry and trained as a high level athlete and trained high level athletes for 30 plus years. And you know, it's a bottom line business, the fitness industry. And so they know in, you know, between December and the end of February, they are going to make a boatload of money on memberships. And they know by March, the gym's going to be clear and free and available space for the regulars. And they don't care. They don't care that you quit coming, that you don't show up for class, that you cancel on all your personal training sessions. And they also know when swimsuit suit season comes along, the same thing's going to happen again, you know, for about, you know, 45 days. And I just felt it really sad, you know, people setting themselves up for failure and a business taking advantage of that known failure over and over. And it's like that in every business, you know, anything that has a bottom line or is commercialized. So I feel like if you want to make a change in your life, start now. Every minute is a new beginning. You know, every minute is a new year. Not just every day, but every minute. Like if you don't like who you are right now, then change yourself. Do something right now. And that has just been, you know, my approach or my attitude. And there's always something that I want to change right now. So like I'm in that perpetual change or evolution of self, trying to be something better because hopefully I'm learning as I go along. Um, so that's my angst with resolutions. I think it leaves people feeling like failures, and that makes me really sad.
Yeah.
Um, and I think, like, as far as revisions, I think my angst is sometimes I just avoid like getting my butt to revision, right? Because I know the commitment once I dive in, I got to stay with it and carving out that time. So I feel like my angst with revision isn't in revising itself. I feel like revision is a little like Tetris and playing games. Like it's super fun. It's a puzzle. I love I love the mind fuck that happens to me when I start pulling pieces apart and pulling them back together. Like I am adrenalized. Like it feels good in my body and in my brain. And I love
Mhm.
thinking and working through things. And getting, you know, the elbow grease going in writing. But I will avoid because I know like I'm gonna be sitting with this for a little while. So I think my angst is with myself in like I've cleaned out all the drawers in the entire house again. And it's only like day 3 when I said I would revise this one piece, right? And I'll find other, you know, very less productive, distracting things to do. And then once I get into it, I'm good, I'm gold, and I love it. So it's not the revision itself, it's my whatever that avoidance is. I'm not sure what that is. Maybe it's the perfectionist side of me um that's showing up to avoid. Yeah. And then
Yeah.
Tomas, I wanted to comment on your receiving of feedback, right? And that I think it's so different because what I realize is I've feel like I've been amongst a lot of fiction writers when I receive feedback, and it's not very helpful as a nonfiction writer. And I want to say this with complete grace, and I say this with grace because I can't change the circumstances. Um, right? If you're writing nonfiction. And so the feedback, if you're with nonfiction writers, it's so different because you focus really hard on craft and you call the narrator and it isn't you and you know your mother or whatever. You're really careful on sticking to the craft side of what's working and not working in that type of feedback. And I feel like in fiction writing feedback, it's not always sticking to craft. It's just like, I like this, I don't like this. Like sometimes it's just subjective opinions. And for me, that isn't really very helpful. If I respect the writers, then I'm like, that's good to know. And it's good to know what's not working or working, no matter what you write, right? If you have 7 people read your piece and 5 of them aren't getting something, that tells you something as a writer. So it's very, very valuable. So I don't want to dismiss any feedback that I've been given. But I feel like when you're writing about yourself, and especially if it's difficult material, you're already raw and vulnerable, and you're bringing
Mhm.
that to the table. And then receiving feedback that's not craft based on your raw and vulnerable life is very difficult to dissect
Right.
yourself from. and
Because there's a
has,
difference between feedback on the writing and judgment of the life
yes,
experience.
yes.
Well,
And
yes.
well, just have the character do this. And I'm like, I wish she was smart enough to have done that, but she did it. Okay. And I'm going to go talk to my therapist. And
Right.
so yeah,
Yeah.
it's hard. It's a different space to embody. And I do think it depends on what you're writing. And I think the same is true of poetry. Like I'm careful who I share my poetry with because it I want a songbird. I want someone with a musical interest in hearing what the poem sounds like line by line, not just I have no interest if you get what I mean in my poem.
Mhm.
Absolutely none. That's not what poetry is or does. It's not storytelling. It's completely different, right? So
Okay,
yeah, I think yeah.
that reminds me, I did react quietly, well, not so quietly, but privately in the space of my own kitchen to feedback that I received from an editor recently on a poem
Hmm.
that they had accepted. But and this was well-intentioned feedback, and it was an editorial suggestion, but the title of the poem is no, I'll take it back. It's not the title, but at one point I refer in the poem to unfiltered camels, the cigarettes.
Mhm.
I am working with a 20-something editor
Hmm.
who has no concept that they're cigarettes called camels, or what a filtered or
What is a
unfiltered
filter?
cigarette might be.
Mhm.
And so she thought that I was referring in some meta sense to an unfiltered camel. And so why in the world would you capitalize camel? And the entire poem was filled with suggestions like that from someone
Hmm.
whose generational gap with me rendered
Yeah.
them unable to understand the for me pop references going
Yeah.
back to the 70s and 80s, right? And
Yeah.
I was beside myself because I'm
Huh.
thinking, I don't know why you all accepted a poem that you think is so flawed.
Hmm.
So I did get bitchy about that, but not to them directly. I just thought to myself, wow, I'm being misunderstood as a poet. And
Well,
Well,
I had to check
you,
myself.
what no one
you
could
know,
see is his diva hand to
I know.
forehead
I was gonna
deep
say, way
dive.
to
So
get
I have to just like add the visual for you all to
did
know what
raise the
Tomas
back of his
just did.
hand to his
Yeah.
pate
And
and
a heavy
just
sigh. Yes.
yeah,
Mm,
the
not
fainting
me.
couch. Yeah.
Yeah.
No, but
Yeah.
I would, that's an interesting element of like editing these, generationally, but I would say, yeah, that's a good question you ask. Why did they accept it? And also, you got to do a little research, people, like, or just like dig it, see some 90s movies or 80s movies. I don't know. Yeah. So
I
that
think
is,
that's the fun in reading too, is like when you have to do some research. I want to work as a reader. I want my readers to work, right? And so it's like, listen,
absolutely
the goal is like, go look it up. Why would
right.
anyone capitalize C? Like maybe look that up first before you ask me.
I
Just
did some voice work for an author for a journal actually a few months ago. And this poem was super racy. It was great, but it involved a whole lot of real technical pornographical terms, most of which I was unfamiliar with. And at my own risk, I had to do some research so that I better understood the context and I knew, one, how to pronounce the words because they weren't all in English, and then two, to better understand the world that I was giving voice to this poem to. And it was actually a joy for me to learn. I was like,
Yeah.
whoa, this 70s porn was super involved, right? And I kind of had to delve into that world to better understand the poem that I was reading, but I actually really enjoyed the experience. I'm like, holy crap, this is true art.
Yeah.
And I loved it. And a part of me was thinking, why couldn't this young editor have actually, like typed in unfiltered camels and she would have gotten a whole page of Google results for camel
And
cigarettes and gone,
images.
oh, right,
Absolutely.
right.
Right. Right. And as long as we're getting angsty on things, I think editorial advice and I think that based or just, feedback in general. I mean, we could talk about how that kind of trickles down, and with the feedback we get, how it trickles down into our own editorial, inner self, inner writer. But I think that what you said, Rebecca, is like, I don't want to pass judgment, I think is what you said, or something along those lines of some feedback. And I think you can pass judgment on people's feedback. I do. And, and that is generalized or is on feels. I mean, you do want the feel and the essence to be something you speak to. And when you're giving feedback or just general thoughts, but I mean, the specificity and figuring out at least the specifics of what like a poem or a short story or an essay kind of wants to be, or where its heart is, and then speaking to that. I think that I know that there are so many people who I don't know, just don't understand that is a really essential part of giving feedback, or if you're ever going to work as an editor, you have to ask the larger questions and not just go
Yeah.
too many vibes, but
Yeah.
also not be too specific like you're talking about. It's like a weird, it's an art. Editing is an art. I mean, I think self-editing and self-revising is a big part of our own art, the three of us here. But just as an outsider working on other people's work, trying to be a good steward of the work and figuring out what it wants to be while still being honest and critical. Yeah, like it's really something that I've, as a teacher of writing, have experienced a lot of angst. We'll just use that word again, because with students who just, they just come at it in this way, like you said, Tomas, judging a character in like a fictional, a piece of fiction, judging an action, judging us, a dwelling where this person lives, and it's like, oh, that's not interesting. I'm sorry, that is not part of what we're doing here. We're trying to make this story better. We're trying to make this poem better. What do get off
I
get off
always
your high
feel like
horse and or get out of the dirt here. So anyway, go ahead.
yeah,
That's the way.
no, I agree. I feel like a great approach. I edit poetry for Frontier magazine, and my approach has, especially in poetry, is to ask the poet a question. Like, what work is this line doing? Is this the best word for the image you're trying to portray? You know? And I think when you put it back to the writer and they can seek it, they're gonna find something that resonates with where they were coming from versus making suggestions. I think it's very egotistical for me to think I know more about somebody's work than they know.
And I think it
And
trickles down,
so
for me. Yeah, for you, does that
yeah,
kind of like become like, if you're asking the questions of other people's writing, you have to kind of, give yourself that same,
you,
sort of
it
like
helps you
same
as a
mind.
writer. Like, you are
Yeah.
asking yourself, like, what is this piece about? Is that the best line? Is that the best word? Is that what I'm going for? Is this the right sound, right? Am I evoking the emotion consistently, like through a narrative psychological arc, like what's happening? So in turn, I'm asking myself those questions, and any good editor knows, like, when you offer feedback for somebody else, really you're only seeing the problems you have in your work, right? So you learn more about yourself as a writer by giving someone else feedback. So it's a
I
super
agree.
powerful, space that you can be in, and it makes you a better writer and a better self-editor, along the way. But I just think it's like, if writers came to the table and offered each other generously questions about the work that they're giving feedback on instead of opinions, it would change the whole reason why you're there, right?
I
Like,
had a
why did
publisher's
you
editor who I
choose?
got to trust really well, who would ask me the question. He'd highlight a whole page and go, "Can you do better here?"
Yeah, I love that. No, that, or
That's
just say, yeah, you
great
could do
though.
better
Like,
here.
I love that. Maybe I should just do that to my entire book. Like, can you do better here?
Yeah, no, I think it's a good, or just an imperative of saying, do better. Like I've
Right.
written that note to people, and that's like, I've had that note written to me. And it's a weird thing too, like if we're talking about outside voices, then we can get to kind of your own process. I'd be curious, in kind of a nutshell, what you guys go through. But I do think that if you offer extraordinarily harsh feedback, let's say, or kind of like mean-spirited feedback, we'll say, or feedback that doesn't take into mind the like the art of it, or just the person behind the art of it. I mean, we all can get frustrated with, as workshop participants. We can get frustrated with other writers in those workshops, or as a teacher of writing, you can get frustrated internally. But I definitely, as best I can, is try to be honest, but also empathetic at the same time. And
Yes, thank you. The best edits or the best suggestions for edits or revisions come from empathy and not judgment.
yeah.
Yeah.
So I think
Yep.
it's an interesting balance, and I try to do that, as much as possible. And I know that, like, gosh, I have small handful of friends, writer friends, or people who don't write much anymore because they kind of got like their hearts torn out and by a
Got
couple
beat
of
up.
people as big time professors, who kind of, one guy I know never finished his thesis because and the thesis being a book length manuscript, because he just got, I don't know. He just got discouraged because he just was getting a lot of shit from, and certain people could probably have taken it differently and not just quit. But anyway, he had that hard time. And I, even personally, really quickly, I just was looking at an old draft of a story from a graduate school workshop, this 20 years ago. And it's a story I was like, well, I don't remember this story. And then I looked at like the story and I looked at the notes on it, and then it was from the professor who I will not name, but just it was kind of like dismissive of the story. And I just was like writing a lot of stories at that time, and I think I did end up, of course, remembering the story, but I was like, and then I looked at it, I'm like, this is a pretty good story. This has potential. Like, what he kind of just shut me down on that story, and it's been sitting in a drawer for 20 years now. And I was like, I'm going to go back to this story because I still like this story. And it was just like, our words can really be, I mean, when you're talking about people's art, it's like you have to be respectful on that deep level. And I don't think I
I
understood that as a younger person, as a younger writer, but it's like the worst thing in my mind you can do to, like,
I
either be
agree.
too like trite about your feedback, maybe not the worst thing, but one of the worst things. And then the worst thing is to be just an asshole about it, or just be self-centered about your feedback. And because it can really do a lot of damage, both as people as an artist, and as a human, So
I
anyway,
think I agree. And I had stopped writing two different occasions in my life because of just being beat to crap. And and then I finally just said, I'm just gonna write for me. Like, right? And it doesn't matter what anyone, I mean, I need to write because I'm sorting myself out through writing. But I got to that place finally. But I really was beaten up two completely different groups and just beaten down. And I just like quit writing for one for over a couple years and another time for about 3 to 6 months. And then I was like, well, I'm just gonna write for me now. And I do think, empathy is like has to be one of the components, but I also think like, are you being helpful? Like the goal in a writing workshop is to
Is the
help
purpose to make
each
it better?
other.
Right.
Can I help this other
mhm.
writer make this piece shine? And I mean, and ego, it's just, it becomes all about ego. Like I'm better than you and I'm better than
Mhm.
you. And so you have all these egos brewing around and they forget to be helpful. And I think like the whole point we're showing up for each other is to help each other become better writers, right?
Totally.
Yep.
And that piece, that component often gets forgotten. Yeah. I think that's where
Absolutely.
the challenge comes. So that's my angst with revision really is in feedback and workshop feedback where people forget to be kind, and helpful and they can damage not just the piece of work but the writer, and then we
For
lose
sure.
that light that writer could have brought to the world.
Absolutely.
Yep.
Yeah. Well, how do you guys just, but then on the personal level, we had to apply that to ourselves. Like, how do you, like, maybe just in a quick, 3 minute or so, like, nutshell, how do you guys go about like your process? What taking either a poem or a short story or an essay or a novel manuscript, and how do you go about from one draft to the next as you revise and re-revise and re-revise just on your own without any other voices?
I'll go
Tomas,
first if you want,
or
or do you want to go first, Tomas?
Rebecca.
Okay.
There we go.
um I'm very systematic. But it doesn't mean that I'm automatic or, in a habit, right? Where I'm like not thinking. So my system moves around a lot. But for example, like in a poem, if I'm writing a poem, or I think it might be a poem, I'm never sure what it might be, right? So it could be a poem. I don't know yet, right? First draft, I don't know what it's going to be. Um, but if I think it has like the musicality that a poem might need, I will take out all punctuation, take out all line breaks, and just put it in one block. And then I'll read it out loud and listen to where I pause and breathe and pitch my voice. And then I'll put marks on the page that way. So that will be like the first draft. And then I know maybe where the line breaks are or punctuation. And then I go back through like, and I'm looking for maybe just imagery, like do all the imageries, coincide? Is there collective here? I go back through and I'm looking for tone. Is the tone consistent, or where's the shift, happening? Then I go back through and I'm looking at verbs, right? It's very specific, like what are the verbs doing? Because those are the power engines. So I just keep going back through, and in each swipe, I'm focused on one aspect of craft. And I pretty much do something similar with every piece of work, whether it's, I have a memoir that's 58,000 words, and I did that with each chapter, and then I did it with the whole book, like 7 times with the whole book. And or if it's a short essay or a flash or whatever, like it doesn't matter. The length does not matter. It needs that same amount of dedication. And I think I have what I would call like 15 steps to focus on that I might rotate. And they all go in different orders. Sometimes I'm just looking at all the to be verbs and get rid of those motherfuckers, right? And so that's all I do. And it might take me a month to get through 58,000 words looking for only to be verbs and replacing them with really specific verbs that are working, right? And that's all I do. And then the next month it might be all tone, emotional tone and voice, and that's all I do, right? And so it's tedious, but I love it. And so that level of revision, that really nitpicky, is far different than what I feel is like the end revision, which is now I'm like, what is this about? Is it working? Do I need to change the order? What's the beginning doing? What's the ending doing? Then I'm looking. So I have all this little craft stuff done and it's out of the way, but I've like sat and brewed with this piece now long enough to like embody it. And then I can ask, I feel like those larger questions. I know a lot of writers do it the other way, but what is this about? And then they go through and nitpick it. I don't work that way. Like I nitpick first and then I kind of can figure the piece out because I've spent time, nurturing it and bringing it to life, feeding it. And now it's like walking and I'm like, okay, now you are walking and you can talk back to me a little bit and tell me what you think you are. Yeah, in a nutshell, I'm oversimplifying it. There's a lot of color coding that goes along with magic markers and hole punching and all kinds of really fun, really playful, interesting things that I do with each piece. And I try to really interact with it. You know, yeah. What about you, Tomas?
What about me? What? How does my self-editing process work?
Yeah, yeah.
Um, it's different depending on the context in which I'm writing something. If I'd like to think that I've made both work, but I don't know. If I'm in a writing group at the time, I'm keenly aware of the personalities who will be looking at what I'm writing. I can't help it. That's my audience right there. Occasionally, I'm able to rise above it and say, fuck it, I'm going to write what I want. Whoever's going to read is going to read it, knowing that it's going to be those 7 people. But I really can't ever completely get out of my head that it's going to be them. And so that doesn't necessarily affect what I write, but I can fairly accurately predict how things are going to land if I know that group fairly well. And so there's that. I'm writing for an audience. I'll get feedback, which I always value, even the feedback that I don't incorporate, which is honestly probably 90% of it. If it's feedback that's well intentioned, it's smart, it's empathetic, but it doesn't fit the vision of the piece because they can't get in my head or my heart, not their fault, then it's well intentioned, it's well taken, but I'm not going to act on it. But every now and then I'll get like this barb. Someone will throw a dart at me and it'll hit, and it was well intentioned, that dart was sent with love, and I say to myself, oh my God, they get it and they're right, and I need to fix that. Example, I got a random piece of advice from a really smart reader a year ago, 2 years ago maybe, in a reading group that Christian ran, and she said, I'm sure there's someone in his life who's willing to help him. And I'm thinking to myself, holy crap, that's true. I set up this main character as a me against the world, but there are good people in the world who want to help, but they've also got their own agendas. And so why can't I be a little bit more sophisticated in who I put around this person? That one hit. And it made it a much better story. Just changing one character close to the main character made it a much better story. And I would have never thought that if I wasn't in that group. On the other hand, when I write something without the benefit of feedback from a group and it gets accepted and the editor's like, we really love this. We love this, 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 and this. I'm thinking, holy crap, I don't need anybody. I'm a genius. And I know that I'm not, but I actually feel this sense of pride that somehow I was able to thread all those needles with those readers, at least, whose job it is to reject things, and they accepted it. And so I feel like I've been successful in both ways. I'm not sure which one brings me more satisfaction, but I do know I go through the ringer a little bit more when I have outside readers. And so to me, that's preferable.
Yeah.
I just want to quickly comment before Christian jumps in. I think I feel like almost the opposite of that. And maybe because I'm a nonfiction writer and there's not a lot of nonfiction writing groups like that meet and offer feedback. But I feel like I do better. My pieces do better, get picked up and published more when it's just me with that piece. And I think because it is nonfiction and I'm choosing what I can be vulnerable with.
It's more
right?
authentic to you, right?
Yeah. And
It's not a life by committee, it's your life.
Yeah. And so I think that it's not anything against workshops or writing groups. I've gotten great feedback, super helpful, really smart people. It's nothing like that. I just feel like I work congruently a little bit better with myself, with my piece, and the process, and I'm not distracted by the feedback that might take me off course with what maybe I was going to dive into and be willing to share. And then suddenly I feel ashamed or self-conscious about something, and then I'm not comfortable sharing it. So I think that affects my work, right? And so I just found like their filters start becoming my filters, and I don't want to have that in my revision process.
I want to validate that. The harshest, least well-intentioned feedback I've received over the years has been on my nonfiction work.
Yeah.
The least helpful, because I'm not trying to tell a quote unquote truth behind the artifice of a story. I'm just saying shit that I think. Maybe I'm trying to do it in a semi-artistic way, but the light's shining through a lot more directly from my opinions, my worldview to the reader than in fiction. And that can really touch some nerves. And so the least well-intentioned feedback I've received have been from people who don't want to critique the work. They want to attack the vision.
Yeah.
And so I totally get where you're coming from with that.
Yeah. And I think because my style is narrative, even in my fiction work, of course, all of us, come to the table still, regardless of what we write. But my poetry is definitely more nonfiction as well. And so I think I've just found like trusting myself and learning to be a really asshole editor for myself has been very useful, And then once in a while, if I'm stuck, I just set it aside. And then like what Christian was saying at the beginning, I'm like, why did I think this was good? Like, oh my God, it's so humbling, to
Hmm.
pick the piece back up and look at it with fresh eyes. Um, so that's learning to do that, I think, is a very valuable skill, to have as a writer. I think it's really important to not rely on outside information and influence on your work so you can be true to your story and learn how to edit, really learn how to edit. All right, Christian,
Yeah,
you,
yeah, yeah.
your
I'll
process.
keep it quick, but just yeah, just that idea. I think it's generally a learned idea or learned practice, I guess, where you gather your ideas of how to become your own self-editor through workshops or through feedback from actual editors, whether it be for me in like the newspaper kind of wrote for my college newspaper, my high school newspaper, and then also out in the world for several years as a freelancer. Worked for the Idaho Statesman for a little bit, but you get feedback there too, and then you're learning to look at your prose differently. Are you getting feedback in a workshop setting? Then have I feel like, and I got good advice along the way, and maybe part of it I've read from books on writing and whatnot, but um, just it takes a long time and many drafts or many stories written or many novels attempted or started at least, and then how to approach once you've gotten feedback, how to apply that sort of that same kind of really close eye to your own writing. It's just a learned experience, or it has been for me. So I've definitely I feel like I'm at a stage like, as a writer in his 50s now. So just like been doing this a while, I do have a good eye for a lot of what I'm doing, quote unquote, wrong or what it needs editing. But I get a lot of especially with this novel stuff that I've really been working on a lot. I, feel pretty darn good about the shape of, let's say, this latest book, or let's say the last book I was working on. But I've had, sort of a couple of readers that have really shown me like things I didn't see, like we all, and just like in a subtle way, but maybe with an extra bit of like, we'll try it this way in this passage, or I'm feeling like there's some incest vibes going on here, and I'm like, wait a minute, no incest vibes, I don't want that. So I'm like, okay, well, let's see if we can make that better. And that's really helpful because I didn't quite intend that. And I think, Tomas, you've in past episodes here, you've spoken to one editor you were incredibly grateful to in that regard. He did not intend something, but I mean, we don't see our own work, even if we've been doing it a long time, as well as others can help us see it. So at this stage, especially in long form for stuff for me, I'm really reliant on my own process now, getting up in the morning, taking on 10, 15 pages of pretty rigorous, revision, and then setting it aside for the next day and working on maybe some new stuff in a different, set of in my notebook or whatever, and then going back to it the next day and like seeing if I figured out something new, and then just kind of plugging away piece by piece by piece, doing the work as often as you can. For me, I try to do something every day at least, or nearly every day. And it's just like a matter in revision. The same thing with creation in a lot of ways. I feel like it's like you put the work in and you're paying attention to what you're doing. Um, and what you're paying attention to is oftentimes informed by other smart readers and people in the world who do this too. And it's like things are going to get better. This novel that's a mess is now looking a little bit more like it could, be good eventually, be really good. But you got to put in the work. So that's what I kind of have been doing for the last year plus. I'm working on two different novels, actually three, but the last 6 or 8 months, especially these two, and just like carving away, carving away, carving away, like in my revision process. But I will say one quick thing too, then we'll go into maybe, Tomas reading what he brought to read from his own work. But sometimes I do think I know for myself, like creation, like new work is like more exciting, or it makes it feel like, oh, I'm really like crushing it here. And it took me a while for like revision, for me to understand revision as like, this is art too. This is like your art. You have to do this too. And I have like, I've been somebody who's written a lot of drafts of a lot of stories and a lot of poems, and then they're just a lot of them are sitting around like never been revised. And I'm like, God damn it, you gotta get these revised. They're sitting there like you can do this, and plus that's actually work and art as well. So it took me a while to kind of figure out it still takes me sometimes to, some time to sort of remind myself, like, you got to go back to these drafts. Otherwise, you're just going to sit there and you're going to die and no one's ever going to read them. Not even
I
you again. So,
I teach
um,
It,
a I
yeah.
teach an editing class, and my core is like the art is in revision. I mean, you throw the slab of clay, that's the first draft. It feels really good because you can see the potential and it's exciting because there's something new there. But when you start carving in the eyelashes, right? You're like,
Mhm.
damn, I didn't know this was going to have art eyelashes, right? It's that carving and carving and carving and getting to the angel or whatever the clay was going to be. That's revision. That's where really the art is in revision every
Mhm.
time.
if there's one aspect of angst that I'm not sure that we've touched on that I know that I feel the most when I'm in the world of revision or feedback, it's when I've been asked to provide feedback to somebody who I know is totally in love with either their own writing or that particular draft. That's really hard because I don't know how to impart empathy in the feedback that I'm providing when I'm pretty certain that either openly or otherwise, the person to whom I'm providing this feedback is going to take it as nothing but harsh criticism because what they wrote is great.
Yep.
And that's so hard. And that says nothing about what I think about the individual other than maybe their ego when it comes to writing. They could be a great person, really kind, but as
Yeah,
soon as they set the pen to paper, what comes out of them in their minds is brilliance.
Yes.
And they
I've,
didn't submit it for feedback. They submitted it to impress the group. And I'm thinking, oh man, I don't want to read this because I know how this is going to go. So
that's
I
the
right.
feel a
problem
lot of
with
angst.
workshops. I agree with you. Like
Yeah.
I feel like with workshops, it's like let me impress everybody and hear everybody tell me how brilliant I am. And it's like you are not here as a writer to work. You're here as a writer to hear how great everybody thinks you are. And those are two different agendas that you're
Yeah.
showing up for workshop with, right?
Yeah.
I
Yep.
also
Right.
am angsty about that, which is maybe why, I mean, I can't exchange that energy anymore. Like I'm done with that. Like I'm like,
Right.
I don't have space to, I have a lot I can give somebody editorially. And it's very generous. And I feel like, and if I'm asking someone for editorial, that's very generous of them, right? And
Hmm.
it's an
Absolutely.
Yep.
exchange. And there's an appreciation. So it's like I'm careful who I share that generosity with, right? It's a lot of work, right? I care. I
Yeah.
really care deeply and
It's a lot of
I
work.
want to
Yeah.
give them my best. And so yeah, I quit participating in that type of thing
Right.
because
Right. And then
I can't do
yeah.
it. I don't have the bandwidth anymore. Like,
Absolutely. I'm
yeah.
more towards that than working one-on-one with people is kind of more kind of my speed these days of working on my own work and working kind of in a small group or, one-on-one. But yeah, that was a real point of trouble teaching at Boise State University. We'll name check that. They there were some very, any class,
Hmm.
there's some students that you just knew weren't even going to read your notes. I'm like, I'm not going to give this person notes, or I would write something kind of a little bit like funny, to kind of in the margins or try to see if I can catch them not reading the notes. Happened all the time, but that's at the, it's kind of a quote unquote required class, even though it was generally an elective, but it was, the undergrad. So that's to be expected. But yeah, but hey, Tomas from Boise State University, where we're here broadcasting right now. What do you have for us?
um, this is a, I don't know. I don't want to use the word cringy. So of course I just put that into everybody's mind. But I went back. I wrote something recently that I'm pretty happy with because it came out fairly organically. Could it have benefited from several people looking at it? Sure, but this is nonfiction. Ultimately, the piece that ended up being accepted for publication. Um, and so I'm not sure that it would have been the best piece for other people to read because this is me, like it or not. But it stemmed from something that I wrote back in 2018, which was part of a novel. And ultimately took it out in subsequent drafts. It didn't belong. I understood what I was going for, but I just moved away from it. But I never got rid of it because what I wrote in that chapter in the original draft of a novel was the quote unquote truth. It was very autobiographical. And so I never let it go. And then I came back and just stopped trying to make a fiction. I wrote an autobiographical piece out of it. So this is first couple of paragraphs from the original version, and then I'll read what it became, first couple of paragraphs, and you'll see that they come from the same place, but it's the ultimate revision. It's really just a rewriting, but it comes from exactly the same place. So this chapter is called Dolores, and I'll just read a couple paragraphs. The last delivery of the night is about 5 minutes from the shop, near the hospital, and a few blocks from his grandmother Dolores's old house on South 14th. A dreamy calmness falls over Daniel as Carlos Celica leaves busy Santa Clara Avenue and enters the 30s and 40s era neighborhood. Even though Dolores had downsized to a condo several years back, he still associates these narrow, tree-lined streets with the times he spent with her as a child. Dolores's house was always still and silent. Sometimes Daniel found it unsettling, sitting in his grandmother's living room, the house so quiet he could hear her turn the page of a newspaper from in the kitchen from down the hallway. The television was rarely on, and the only programs Danielle could ever remember watching in their entirety with her were the Lawrence Welk Show, or maybe Hee Haw if Dolores was feeling a little sassy. If he was lucky, he might catch snippets of Mutual of Omaha's Wild Kingdom. The episodes about wolves, snakes, and eagles were his favorites. So that's the beginning of that chapter, which ultimately I just tore out. Fast forward 6 years, and it became a short essay called My White Grandmother's House. And first couple of paragraphs are, my white grandmother's house is white, with a red Spanish tile roof and a matching detached garage, which stands at the end of a narrow driveway. The backyard is a leafy, shaded square bordered by a tall fence, tastefully overgrown with grapevines, bougainvillea, and the low-hanging branches of orange trees. A pillowy clover lawn seems to absorb sound and reveals, at artistic and precise intervals, pale flagstones that run from the back porch to a concrete bird fountain, on which is perched a winged angel, its symmetrical Teutonic face raised to the sky, as if to say, rejoice, all is exactly as it should be. There is a stillness in this green yard that is alternately peaceful and brooding. I can never bring myself to tread on that perfect emerald carpet. The thought of leaving a footprint with my dirty Chuck Taylors keeping me on the stoop that leads to my grandmother's master bedroom. Like a real master bedroom with an actual bathroom and everything. The house is as quiet as the backyard. So quiet that I can't imagine a sharp sound ever breaking the eerie silence. Oak floorboards whisper in the hallway where I inspect, for the 1000th time, grainy black and white photos of the tall, fire-haired people who have given me one of my two last names. From the photos stare three boys. The boys are tall and fair and look like escapees from a Norman Rockwell painting. Two of them smile. The third, oldest boy, who would later reject college and learn to throw himself out of perfectly good airplanes and sit on his jump kit in a German hangar for 2 days waiting to dive into Budapest at the spear point of World War III before being told to return to his barracks and then be discharged for drunkenness and later convince my mother to drink with him at a bar under Highway 101. That boy does not smile. His brothers, my uncles, would one day say that he was not capable of smiling. Not really. So those are two different versions coming from the exact same place.
Wow. Complete, like light and darkness contrasted, right?
Yeah.
The tone, like, yeah, beautiful. The revision is beautiful.
Thank you. I appreciate that.
Yeah, haunting. And I could just feel like the difference in the selection of imagery, you know, the emerald carpet, like just some specifics, right? That like placed me in a different way. So I had a whole different emotional interaction with the second piece than I did with the first piece. Like it was it reached me differently.
Yeah, thank you. And that's probably why it didn't make it into the novel. When I would go back and reread it, I'd say, I know what I was trying for, but I definitely wasn't nailing it. So you're out.
Yeah. Yeah. Wow.
And I think you're muted, Christian.
Talking to me? Sorry,
Yeah.
guys. I know. I was trying to, keep away the leaf blower sound here in San Diego, but sorry, I don't need to mute myself. But what I was saying was brilliant. But what I'm no, see how I love
I
the,
could
I
tell.
love
I
what
could
you,
see the look on your face, and I thought, God damn, this is some smart stuff coming
I
out
So
of his
know.
mouth.
It's like the
smart.
nicest thing I ever said about anybody's writing ever. Good job.
Glad we missed it.
Yeah.
Again. Like
I know we don't get mute buttons like that in workshop generally, I guess. So, well, these days, I guess on the Zoom like this, but yeah, I just was saying nice things about what your revision did. So, and just a re-envisioning of this, like truly this work, like the word says, the revision. It's like that was a perfect example. But then Rebecca, you brought one too.
yeah, I
According
brought
to the script.
something and I'm just going to read a very small section. So this is it's from a larger project. It's an essay from a larger project, still unpublished. But this piece was published in the Rumpus 2 years ago. It's called Graced and Bedazzled. And the challenge that I was having with this piece, it took me a long time. I started writing it in 2014. So if that tells you, that's 8 years of like revisiting this piece and revisiting this piece, but it's the journey of my neck breaking and or collapsing, I should say, because my neck was broken like 30 years before that. And what the challenge really was is that a year after my neck collapses and I go through all this therapy and relearning how to hold a pen and a crayon and write and feed myself, my neck collapses a second time, but worse. And I have to redo the whole thing again, right? For another year. And my sons are very young, and I'm a single mother, and I'm in school at BSU at the time. And just like, so trying to parallel these parallel stories that are too similar, right? But it's important because they do build on each other. And I am changing in the process, from the first to the second one and the second one out of that space. And so I had to keep returning to this and playing with time and how I was going to manage time in this piece. And so one of this, I'm diving in a few pages in. And this was something I spliced in that was kind of important. So I open the piece with my 5-year-old teaching me how to color. And I have a crayon or a coloring pencil rubber banded to my hand. And he's like, just stay in the lines, mommy, you can do it. Right. He's trying to encourage me. And, and so, and after that, I go to therapy, and the therapist is who rebuilt my neck both times, and also was my same therapist when I was a athlete on the world circuit, right? So he knew me. He knew like where I wanted to go again with my body and what I wasn't able to do, and he was trying to help me get back, not just faculties to live, but faculties to thrive again, right? Okay. So one of the resolves was I needed to splice pieces in to separate these two events. And then I also needed to bring them closer together to weave them, right? And so it was kind of this magic that needed to happen. So this is a piece I ended up splicing in, but it wasn't in like the first 20 drafts. After therapy and before coloring, I drive to Boise State University. I've adjusted my driving. My seat sits further back. I tuck 2 rolled hand towels, one on each side between elbows and body. My forearms rest on armrests as I steer with my left hand. I hook my right hand at the base of the steering wheel like an accessory, scarf, earring, hood ornament. To look left or right, I rotate at the waist. I drive in the slow lane. Cars pass me as they travel the speed limit. I pull into accessible parking. I'm here to meet Mick for the first time. He's the disability specialist. He's the man who can flip my textbooks to e-models because I'm unable to bend my neck to read. Plus, my vision blurs, the doctors think, because of my spine. Please sit, Nick says, seated at his desk. I avoid eye contact. I'm uncomfortable asking for favors. I don't want to need assistance. I don't want to be disabled. I wave. I wave with my good hand. He doesn't wave or extend his hand in an offer, a handshake, and I'm grateful because I can't shake back. Instead, he commands his phone. Siri, big text. From across the desk, the words on his phone grow like font from early reader books. This is my new life, I think. Do you have an iPhone or Android? He asks. iPhone. Great. Open the settings, he says. I nod. No, I try to nod. Can the body unchannel auto responses, smiling, thumb upping? Under accessibility, there's text options, bolder, larger, voiceovers, he says. I balance my phone on my leg, pin it with my right forearm, and with my left hand, I scroll, press the wrong tab. I roll my eyes, a movement that I still master. I ask, do I have to read my books from my phone? We can order large font and print, or you can have audio, he says. I can have my textbooks in audio. I finished my degree using mostly audio text, he says. I look up from my phone, away from my struggle. Now I notice. I notice him, his movements. I notice a cloudiness in his eyes. I notice a probing cane leaning against his desk. One by one, details register, and after a minute or three, I understand. He is blind. He swirls round in his chair, types on his computer, his visual limits nearly undetectable. I bite my lip. Here's Mick. I missed seeing him, really seeing him. Though he clearly sees me, he, in his blindness, sees I can finish my degree. He sees what I cannot, though I didn't understand this at the time. At the time, I'm consumed by my injury. Everything feels as if I'm on a steep climb. On the outside, I've my game face, pretending I've got this. Inside, though I won't know this until years later, I'm afraid.
Nice.
Yes,
Very
I
nice.
appreciated that subtle move into what I wanted to call a twist, but it didn't feel like a twist. It felt like an evolution of the awareness.
That's a good way to put it. I agree. The evolution of the awareness. That's a very good term to use. We're going to have a glossary of our terms, right?
I know. Thanks to Tomas and you. Yeah,
Wow.
and the piece needed like the layering because it had a layering, but the layering wasn't going to work because the storylines were too similar. And
Yeah.
so it needed this texture and different experiences that were happening that helped me when I got to the next neck collapsing, right? What had changed, right? That made that second experience different. And so I had to go back through my archives of what I went through, and why I was approaching it differently the second time around, right? That I could write it so that the reader wouldn't be confused, right? That was the problem, was the reader was confused, would be confused because they were too similar. Like this happened, but it's the same thing. And then that's boring. Most people will composite experiences, right? Or even characters,
Yeah.
in nonfiction and fiction to make it work. But this, I tried that and that wasn't working either. So compositing it wasn't going to work either.
Right on. Yeah, I think you did a great job.
Yeah.
Yeah, thanks.
Absolutely. Yeah, there is something that's like a good revision that you pulled off is like there's nothing quite as satisfying as that. Even though I mean, it's a little different kind of form of it, the same kind of like element I get, or I guess like the essence I get, I should say, with like creating something new. But when you pull off a great revision and then you're like, oh my gosh, I think this is done, and quote unquote done, we never probably feel like our work is done, but it's like when you pull something off and it's like you nail it, you're like, God damn, I did it. It's like what I kind of unpuzzled it. So that's
So
such an awesome example of it.
I have an angsty question.
Hmm.
Yes, you're in the right place.
it, who is served best by the revisions? The reader or the author? Because we can all talk about how happy we are with the revisions, how much better they reflect what we were trying to do at the beginning or what it evolved into. But I've read a handful of stories, first version and later version.
Well,
And I feel like there's a reader bias towards the first version that they've experienced, even if the revised version is better thought out or more complete or more care has been taken. Maybe it's more seamless. But I feel like there's a bias on the part of the reader towards the first thing they experience, assuming this is a piece of art that they want to experience more than once in two different ways. And so
right.
sometimes I ask myself, am I making this better on the other side? Or am I just polishing this stone so that I can see myself in it better? But the person that I'm going to hand it to or the reader isn't going to appreciate the difference. I don't know the answer to that.
I think
Yeah.
it's a really great question. I want to like first of all commend you. And I think like my hope for me at least is that I'm revising for clarity for the reader. Um, right? I mean, I think like that's the goal, right? That
Yeah.
Right.
especially with I think with nonfiction, because so much of the you've lived the experience and so you skip some details out of assumption, right? Because they're so natural to
Right.
you. And
Mm-hmm.
so I feel like revision helps you like get things more concrete for the reader
Mm-hmm.
um, on that level
Yeah.
so that they can really place themselves in the experience, create a line of empathy and, you know, evoke some emotion. So my hope is that it's doing that. But if I'm honest with myself, I am probably revising for me,
Hmm.
right? At the end of the day. Like I do think there's some ego to it, on making it better, that perfectionist driven way of can I make this sing? Can I say this in a fresh way?
Right.
Can I do something new with form, right? I mean, I'm trying to push myself as an artist. And I do think that is some ego, right? That's drive and ego. That's not necessarily competitiveness or negative ego. But if I'm honest, like there's some of that that gets me excited about revision, right?
Right.
That's the satisfying part of revision. It's like, oh, I figured this thing out, right? So
Yeah.
it's super
Yeah.
satisfying. So that's for
Yeah.
me. Like if they never read the early draft, like they don't know what was revised or not. So it's really isn't for them at the end of the day, right? In a way. I don't know. Kristen, what are your thoughts?
Yeah,
It's a great
I have
question.
thoughts. I would say it's definitely, a complicated question for sure. So, um, the answer is complicated at least, and it is a complex question to consider. So I just think that there's a good example, a great, maybe the most epic example I know of. I'll to speak to this in 1 second in the published world, but yeah, for myself, I definitely feel like I'm trying to revise, to get what I want to say across in the best possible way. I think I've learned that more, but I do look back at early drafts of especially more esoteric sort of poetry, sort of, things that I feel like I know exactly what this means.
Mm-hmm.
And that's awesome. And it's maybe better served in the early draft or like the first, the, sort of throw it on the page sort of moment. But later I realized that this is me reading my own work. And so I know it, that I want to get that essence across. And also you find new elements, new nuances, that
Yeah.
you that are in there, you unpack them. At least I do try to, at least in, or pair them back, sort of get rid of the incest vibe, that kind of thing. You're like, ah, I didn't want to, and
I
then
feel like that should be the title of your craft book, like how to get rid of incest, right?
yeah.
In your
But yes, but there I quickly we'll go over this. Is a very you guys should look this up. It's not even as available as it should be now because the estate of Raymond Carver worked with it. There's a very serious sort of editorial heavy hand that in an artful way, I feel like that this guy named Gordon Lish did with a lot of uh, all pretty much of Raymond
Carver's.
Carver's
Yeah,
early
yeah.
work. And like if you can find a copy of like the story, what we talked about when we talk about love, which is a title that Gordon Lish came up with after Raymond Carver titled this story Beginners. There is a line, we're beginners at love, I think, in the story, if I remember right. But anyway, Carver's original, he really stuck to the original. Like he loved that. And his wife, Tess Gallagher, his partner, hung on to that as the better version, the beginner's version. But Gordon Lish took literally at least a third of the story out, and then he published it as what we talk about when we talk about love. And if you're a literary kind of short story person, or maybe even if you're not, you've heard that title, and it's been sort of rearranged by different writers and repurposed. But it's a classic American short story in the way that Gordon Lish revised it slash edited it, slash maybe murdered it, according to Tess Gallagher. So yeah, and I think Carver really was so hurt. He really thought the original version was probably later. He he kind of broke up with Gordon Lish as an editor and friend. Actually, it's a really compelling story, the whole thing. But anyway, that's a great example of like he wrote this story that was well revised and great, he thought, and really loved it as beginners, and then it was turned into what we talk about when we talk about love, and it was probably made better, in my opinion, as I think it was made better as just a rawer story that kind of Gordon Lish knew as an editor how to really get at that revision that Carver maybe didn't have the heart to do to his own story, or maybe didn't really think, I don't know. Anyway, it's a long story, but yeah, it's just like what draft is better and serves this is the middle draft sometimes. Like the fourth draft might be way better than like the last draft, and revision. You
You
can
can
really,
definitely over revise.
yeah,
Well, and
Yeah,
not every director's cut is better, right?
yeah,
that's
yeah.
true.
I
Yeah,
mean,
yeah,
I saw if there are some sci-fi fans out there, I will probably really piss them off. But I saw the director's cut of Blade Runner last summer. It's supposed to be the pinnacle of the movie.
yeah.
Everything that the director said it should be. And I'm speaking as someone who saw the original in the theater as
Yeah.
a 13-year-old
Yeah,
who
yeah.
fell in love with what I saw. So this is my first draft, or I should say the draft that got put out to the public, entering my mind. And I thought that the director's cut was a mess.
I agree.
There were
Yeah.
parts of the story that didn't make sense because they threw in every scene. And I actually saw the brilliance of the original trimmed down version. And I thought, that's a better story. Even the questions that were left in the mind of the viewer at the end of that, because of those cuts that they
Mhm.
made, are artistic questions that
Mhm.
drove a sequel that made it a classic. And in
Yeah.
some cases, those were answered in the director's cut. And I just thought, one, it's not better storytelling. Two, you kind of fucked up the magic.
Yeah.
Hmm.
And
Yeah, you
so
can't be on point like that. Yeah.
I don't
Right.
know.
I think, well, the
Yeah.
same thing. I don't know exactly if it was considered what Francis Ford Coppola wanted from Apocalypse Now, but the Apocalypse Now, sort of uncut version is a really long, beautiful movie
Yeah.
still. But it does have a lot of there's a whole French colonial scene that lasts a long time. Just I think mostly to get
Yep.
Charlie Sheen some sex, mostly. Yeah. So but it is a great scene. It's really beautiful and it fits, but has the same. I mean, the original, or actually the movie theater version of Apocalypse Now is really one of my favorite movies of all time, if
Yeah,
not at the
I
top. It's
agree.
so yeah, and Blade Runner's up there too. But anyway, that's the art and craft coming together to like and sensibility just to know what should stay and what shouldn't, and that's a hard thing. But I will read a short piece myself, then we'll move to the outro, right?
Yep.
And
Yeah.
maybe think about one resolution you have for the new year. I was thinking we didn't talk about as much resolution as we did
Because we all
revision.
resolve every day. Like
Yeah, that's
we're
true. So
resoluting each day. Like, yeah.
you
But go ahead.
resolve
Yeah.
not to be, yeah. So this is it's a very short piece. It's from it's from from a book called Pieces for the Left Hand by J. Robert Lennon. And it's a book of a number of micro pieces that all kind of blend together. There's a community kind of he creates through these very short pieces, and he actually wrote the book, as I understand it, and it came out 20 years ago or so, probably, but or maybe more now. But he was a new father, and he worked right, and he would get up early in the morning, only had so much time, or he had other life obligations. He would get up early and only have time to maybe write a couple hundred to 500 words, and he would do that every day. Then he started seeing like, oh, these kind of fit together into a book, and he ended up publishing it. And then this piece is part of what they published in the Best American Short Stories as one story that has several little pieces. And this is the final piece, and it has to do with revision. And we'll just call it 8 Pieces for the Left Hand. Number 8. A local novelist spent 10 years writing a book about our region and its inhabitants, which, when completed, added up to more than 1,000 pages. Exhausted by her effort, she at last sent it off to a publisher, only to be told that it would have to be cut by nearly half. Though daunted by the work ahead of her, the novelist was encouraged by the publisher's interest and spent more than a year excising material. By the time she reached the requested length, the novelist found it difficult to stop. In the early days of her editing, she would struggle for hours to remove words from a sentence, only to discover that his paragraph was better off without it. Soon she discovered that removing sentences from a paragraph was rarely as effective as cutting entire paragraphs, nor was selectively erasing paragraphs from a chapter as satisfying as eliminating chapters entirely. After about a year, she had whittled the book down to a short story, which she sent to magazines. Multiple rejections later, however, drove her back to the chopping block, where she reduced her story to a vignette, the vignette to an anecdote to an aphorism at last to this haiku. Tiny upstate town undergoes many changes, nonetheless endures. Unfortunately, no magazine would publish the haiku. The novelist has printed it on note cards, which can be found giving away to passersby in our town park, where she is also known sometimes to sleep, except when the police, whose thuggish tactics she so neatly parodied in her original manuscript, bring her in on charges of vagrancy. I have a copy of the haiku pinned above my desk, its note card grimy and furred along the edges from multiple profferings, and I read it frequently, sometimes with pity, but always with awe.
Mm. I love that.
I love that too.
My God, I love that so much. Thank you for sharing that.
Yes, it's a great, he's really great at these kind of community-based like legends, slightly urban legends, maybe slightly, sort of like village lessons, or mythologies, I guess we'll say. But he's really great, and it's funny stuff. I would recommend 8 Pieces for the Left Hand, or just Pieces for the Left Hand by J. Robert Lennon, plus some of his other stuff is pretty awesome that I've read. I haven't read his entire catalog, but that one always stuck with me as just like, oh, that's actually, like, I can see how you could just whittle and whittle and whittle forever and down to a haiku that still won't be published. It's like so sad.
I thought for sure it was going to say that at one point, one of the people who had rejected the short story said, this should really be a book.
Yeah. Yeah, I did too.
Oh, there's another one real quick. It's really, speaking of revision, this would have been a funny one to read of his. Then we can go to the outro. But there is this like local poet, like in this same kind of community he creates, who is kind of famous as a poet. He got a drunk driving ticket. He got arrested for drunk driving, and they like confiscated his car, sent him to jail, this poet. And he died when his car was in impound. He subsequently died, like over the course of a week. And so then this cop came across his old manuscripts, and this is a short story and it's fiction, but it could be somewhat true. this poet had then gone to publish like this other poem collection of poems, and then the cop like looks at the poems that he has, and he like starts making some changes and some edits, and then resubmits it, and then the book starts winning all these awards. So this cop has made all these edits and revisions to this famous poet's sort of masterwork, and then the cop never tells a soul, or so I can't remember exactly how it ends, but it's like the cop who's just a cop gets these manuscripts and starts making edits, and then his edits are way better than this famous poet's sort of ideas for it. So that's a good play
Fantastic.
around with the idea of revision that J. Robert Lennon also gets to. But whew, yes, we've gone a while today, so
Yeah, we've gone a
surprising.
while. And I think, like, to me, I think at the crux of it, we have our angst towards revisions and resolutions, but I feel like all three of us, like, really rely on our hearts and our
Yeah,
intuitiveness
Mhm.
when it comes to art and re revising ourselves, right? And I think that's pretty cool. Like, what a cool thread that we share.
Well, thank you. I agree. And I think that's the heart is the best, revisionist, I should say. I don't know, the reviser.
the heart of the best editor.
The best editor, yeah,
Yeah.
asking, like figuring out your own sensibility, and like it's hard, to figure out what the heck a piece wants to be. But once you sort of like feel like that, turn to it and ask it some questions, I think that's good. And so,
Mhm.
um, any resolution for the new year? I'm just going to start with one. I do plan on finishing two novel draft complete revisions. I have one that I feel like is quote unquote complete, so that one's already in the can for now. At least I think it's pretty very close where it wants to be. But I have two in 2025. I would like, maybe in the first half of 2025, but really to get two novel drafts complete. These next two completely done and ready in several, I don't know, dozen revisions I'll be in on them. But I don't know, getting those two done and then
That's
see out
exciting.
the world.
That's
Yeah.
exciting.
We'll see. How about you, Tomas? Any particular resolutions in the writing world?
Um, be patient with graphic artists.
Mm, I saw a
Um,
post you made about something like this.
Mhm, mhm,
well, and I had no idea. I talk about not being precious with your vision. And now I'm realizing what a hypocrite I am, because
mhm.
if there's one thing that I want, it's the cover of the book. I mean, they say don't judge a book by its cover for a reason, right? Because that's the first thing you see, and you're going to pick it up or not because of that damn cover. And so I understand that there is this tension between making someone want to pick it up and the cover of that book actually reflecting what's inside it.
Mm.
And I want a book cover to reflect what's inside it. And I understand why a publisher wants for someone to just pick the damn thing up. And those visions are so far apart. And so my resolution, if I'm actually going to make one, is to come to this whole thing with grace and avoiding as much as possible that really annoying prima donna artist mindset.
That's a good one. Yeah, no,
It's going to be hard though.
Please write about how you do that.
Yeah.
yeah.
Yeah, I
And
think for
Rebecca,
me, I have uh essay collection coming out in 2026, and
yes.
very excited about it. So I'm doing the final, what I'm calling the final revisions, but I know better than that on that. And I really like, I want to have that done at the beginning of the year because I have a second a hybrid manuscript that is going to go through a big cohort that I got accepted into, and I'm very excited about that. And that manuscript's done, so it needs that revision. Um, so maybe, that'll be on the block also in 2026 or maybe the following year. But so two big books that are so a lot of revision, a lot of poetry revision, a lot of essay revision, and then overhauling, narrative arcs in both of those pieces, which is, I think, the fun part, the choreography of it,
Yeah.
but it also can feel super overwhelming as well. So just taking good care of myself. Um, while I'm doing the work, right? No matter what, whether I'm generating or revising, like the work is close to my heart. And so I really like taking good care of my body and my emotional well-being while I'm diving deep is a big part of my resolution every day. Like don't dive deep and not come back up like for air. Um
Mhm.
so that's I think that's like the most important thing is staying centered um on self and family, community, in the process of it all. No matter. Yeah.
No matter. That's right. Well, keep doing what you're doing. All, both of you, we all will. And it's going to be an interesting year in the world at large, for us artists especially, and people of, I think, integrity and smarts. We're gonna have to fight a little harder, I feel like. So keep on keeping on and keep up the good work. And that's a wrap.
That's right.
According to my script, you've heard about our angst with bars, beers, and bartending. I see that's a little Easter egg in there that we've had. Well, I'm just going to leave it at that. You've heard our angst with bars, beers, and bantering,
Bartering.
bartering. Well, bantering and bartering. I don't know. Okay. We've done all that stuff, but we are the three angsty poets, myself, Christian Wynn, here with Tomas Baiza and Rebecca Evans. We have plenty more angst to share, so you hear from us soon. And that's a wrap.
That's a wrap.
Thank you for joining us today. We'll be back next Monday. Tune in.